Good morning everybody, this is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It is July the 31st and we're looking at Psalm 77 and 78. Now Psalm 77 is a slightly longer psalm than what we're used to, and 78 is very much longer than we're used to. We're going to read through these two psalms and we're going to feel what it's really like to live in the Old Covenant. The first one is a psalm of Asaph. He says, I cried unto the Lord with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My soul ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Wow. You see, Asaph is describing here a time in his life in which he feels that God has forsaken the nation. But he comes before the Lord in the personal pronoun. He says, I cried unto the Lord, and in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. Let's read on. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I communed with mine own heart, and my spirit made me diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will he be favourable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Doth his promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. Now there's a whole lot of questions. These are the questions that would make the blood run cold of every Jew that reads it. I don't suppose this is a favourite psalm, and yet it is a psalm that would be sung in great adversity. He says, and I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also on all thy work and talk of thy doings. So that's my password. Verse 10, 11 and 12. He says, I will remember. I will remember. I will remember. And we don't live in Old Testament times today. We're not in this Old Covenant. We're not part of the Jewish race. But that doesn't mean to say that the Old Testament isn't something to be read, even though it may not have a direct application. Because by reading of what God did for them, we are encouraged in what God will do for us. And we will remember what God has done. And we will remember all the works of God, and we will remember all the wonders of old, and we will meditate on all thy work and talk of thy doings. Verse 13, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. Wow. And then verse 16, interesting, he says, the waters saw thee, O God. The waters saw thee, and they were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water, the skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heavens. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. The way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Wow. And so he says, we will remember what God did. Whenever Israel wanted to remember the mighty hand of God, they always remembered their deliverance through the Red Sea. They always remembered the time when God pushed back the waters and made the waters stand in heaps when he led them through the dry ground. What an amazing demonstration of the mighty power of God. And they always remembered that. But one day they will forget all about that. Not because they've lost their memory, but because something else will happen that will completely eclipse all of that. And that will be the restoration of Israel, of the tribes that so-called are lost, that will be brought back into the land by angelic means from every single quarter of the world. They'll be brought back to the land of Israel, and they'll be brought back in such a way that will eclipse in their minds the mighty power of God. Now, Psalm 78 is a long psalm. Most of the psalms that we've been reading together are short, but this is long. And so what we'll do is we'll just go straight into it and read it straight off and see how the Lord leads us. I've called it The Lord Loves His People, but actually it's a psalm which describes the disciplining hand of God upon his people. Because although the Lord loves his people more than perhaps he ever should, nevertheless the children of Israel, they constantly forsake the Lord. All through their history they forsake the Lord. And this is probably not a favourite hymn for the Jews today, because it reminds them of all their backslidings. So let's read. It's a maskil of Asaph. In other words, it's a teaching psalm where Asaph is going to teach the children of Israel about their history. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. So Asaph is very brave. He says, look, we've not got a great history, but we're not going to hide from that. We're going to teach that to our children. We're going to explain to our children that our forefathers were wicked. Often they were so wicked that God moved in severe judgment upon them. We're not going to hide this truth from our children, because this will produce the fear of the Lord in our children, and that for them will be the beginning of wisdom. And then verse 5, he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make known to their children, that generation to come might know them, and the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. So we have an insight here. The very existence and the character of Old Testament people is this, that they had a law to keep, and that this law was to be passed on from generation to generation, from father to son and father to son and father to son, and they might teach them all the failings of the previous generations, so that they would set their hope in God. You see, the very existence of the nation of Israel is based upon one simple fact, that they have a covenant relationship with their God, and that they are obliged by law to keep the commandments. If they do that, God blesses them. But if they fail to do that, and they turn away with a stubborn and rebellious generation, and do not set their hearts aright, then the Lord will discipline them very hard. Verse 9, the children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God, and refused to walk in his law, and forgot his works and his wonders that he showed them. Marvellous things he did in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt and in the field of Zoan. He divided the sea, caused them to pass through. He made the waters to stand as a heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness, and gave them to drink out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock. He caused waters to run down like rivers, and they sinned yet more against him by provoking him, the Most High, in the wilderness. They tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yet they spake against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, and the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth. And so a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation. Though he had commanded the clouds from above, and opened the doors of heaven, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven, man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp, and round about their habitations. So they did eat and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not estranged. We just get to the top of the page. They were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God fell upon them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, then they sought him. They returned and inquired early after God. And they remembered that God was their rock and the high God of their Redeemer. Nevertheless they did flatter him with their mouth. They lied unto him with their tongues, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity, and destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned he his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath, for he remembered that they were flesh, a wind that passed away, and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness, and grieve him in the desert? Yet they turned back, and tempted God, and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from their enemy, how he had wrought his signs in Egypt, and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers unto blood, and their floods that they could not drink. He sent divers sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and their labour unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their flocks with hot thunderbolts. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath and indignation and trouble, by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger, spared not their soul from death, gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, and the chief of their strength, in the tabernacles of Ham. He made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by the line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Now you would have thought that after all that, Israel would seek the Lord. Finally, Israel would learn their lesson. Verse 56, yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacles of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men. He delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over unto the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awakened as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouteth by reason of wine. And he smote his enemies in the hinder parts, he put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high places, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, and from following the ewes, great with young. He brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. And so he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. You know, David was in many respects the saviour of Israel. He was one who had the heart of God in his heart. He understood the Lord very well indeed, and he served the Lord pretty well all his life, and he led the children of Israel like sheep in the desert. But when we read the rest of this psalm, what a catalogue of failure upon failure upon failure. There were times when Israel returned, they repented, and they returned to the Lord, their covenant God. And there were notable times when God delivered them, and God returned to them. Under Samuel in particular, and under certain of the prophets, they had a great revival, as in the days of Elijah. But most of the time, their history was a history of failure. And so there we are. What an amazing thing. And this gives us a very deep insight into what life in the Old Covenant was all about. It was about fearing God. It was about keeping his commandments. And if they didn't keep his commandments, then the judgments and the disciplines of God fell upon the nation very greatly. Well, God bless you. It's great to speak to you, and wish you every blessing for the day, and look forward to speak to you tomorrow. Bye for now.